Hello everybody and welcome back. This is now week number 4 for the college football season coming up this weekend. 3 weeks down. That means we're a quarter of the way through the regular season for most teams, as depressing as that sounds. We have quite a bit to look back on. Not a good week for myself when it comes to predictions. We actually had a losing record. Last week I went 4-6. Just straight up. I also went 4-6 against the spread, and that moves us to 25-10 overall. So as always, we'll jump into all the games last week that I predicted, and then we will go ahead with the games this week. Speaking of which, there are only 8 on my schedule this week. As I mentioned in the last video, this week is pretty light in terms of good games and high-profile games. But I managed to find 8. I really only found 6, but I went back and made sure I got an upset and a lock that I like, so that pushes it to 8. So we'll get into those ones, we'll get in those predictions. But for now, let's take a look at what we had last week as far as predictions go and how those went. Started off good the first 2 weeks. 11-2 last week, or 11-2 in week 2, 10-2 in week 1, but yeah, 4-6 this last week. Not good. Pretty tricky week, a lot of upsets. Okay, so the first game from last week was number 23, Tennessee, going on the road to take on number 24, Florida. Florida was a 5.5 point favorite, and I picked Tennessee to win outright. And my reasoning for that was Florida's offense is awful. Tennessee at least looked competent their first 2 games of the season. I figured that they would be able to put up some points on the Gators, and I wasn't sure how the Gators would put up points in response. I said they would have to do what they did most of last year and just score in other ways besides on offense. Which, what do you know, they did. They had an interception return for a touchdown in this game. That was one of their 3 touchdowns. They managed 2 offensive touchdowns, and as everybody knows, one of the last play of the game. But anyway, Florida ends up winning 26-20, so I got the prediction wrong and obviously the spread wrong since I thought Tennessee would win outright. Yeah, so like I said, the reason I picked Tennessee was I figured they were at least a competent team. I like Georgia Tech, so I didn't think Tennessee's near loss to them was a sign of Tennessee being terrible. And, Tennessee might not have the greatest defense, but I figured Florida has 0 offense. And Florida's defense, which is supposed to be great, yeah, I had 2 pick sixes against Michigan, but other than that, they let Michigan rack up over 400 yards and quite a few points. If Michigan didn't stall on a lot of drives, they would have had a lot more points that have settled for some field goals in that game. That was all we saw from Florida before this game, so I just didn't like their odds against Tennessee. But, what do you know? Once again, Florida beats Tennessee, this time giving Tennessee a taste of their own medicine from last year and even their opening game against Georgia Tech, where they come back late. Well, Tennessee actually had to come back late, like they do in all their games, it seems like, but they weren't able to finish it off, and I believe Tennessee beat Georgia last year on a Hail Mary on the last play, so Florida returns the favor with a 63-yard pass in the last play of the game to win 26-20. Terrible by Tennessee. First of all, why are you running a cover 2 in that situation? They only had 2 safeties back. Secondly, how can you possibly, as a safety in that situation, let your man behind you? That doesn't make any sense. And third, once that man's behind you, there's about 3, 4, 5 steps where the safety's behind him. He's obviously beat on the play. He's looking at the receiver who's looking up and looking back and has his arms out, so you know the ball's coming to him. You're beat. This isn't the NFL. Tackle the dude by his legs. Wrap him up, take him down, take the 15-yard penalty, and live to fight another down. Because if you take the 15-yard penalty, now Florida, they would be, they're 63 yards, so they were at the 37. So once you see that wide receiver has beaten you, tackle him, take the 15-yard penalties. That puts Florida at the, what would that be? I believe that would be Tennessee's 47, so obviously way too far for a field goal. So they're only going to be able to run a Hail Mary, and then maybe Butch Jones actually puts the correct defense on the field, and you're playing in overtime because the Hail Mary would most likely not work. So a ridiculous defensive play call, and then just a ridiculous execution by A, letting your man behind you, and B, just take the pass interference penalty. I don't know why. Once you're beat, the game's over. So take the 15 yards, they're not in field goal range, and live to fight another down. So we got that one wrong. Next game was my upset of the week. It was Central Michigan going into Syracuse. I said Central Michigan would win outright. Central Michigan looked really good against Kansas, and Syracuse is Syracuse. They're not a great team. And it was looking good for the first half. It was 17-24 at the end of the half. Syracuse led by a touchdown. But then the second half, or really just the third quarter, was all Syracuse. They scored 17 points in the third to go up 41-17, and that was it for that game. Central Michigan gave them a fight. Syracuse had 579 yards to Central Michigan's 382. Each team had 3 turnovers. Central Michigan actually had more first downs and more time of possession. But yeah, Syracuse just found a way to score more. They were much better on third down than Central, and that was pretty much it. So we got that one wrong as well, unfortunately. Syracuse was a 10.5 point favorite. They covered with a 41-17 win. And then we had one of the most impressive performances of the day. It was Purdue going on the road to take on Missouri as a 7-point underdog, and they win by 32. They win 35-3. Purdue went up early, and they stayed up and just kept coming and absolutely dominated the Tigers. I picked Missouri to win, but I said they wouldn't cover the 7-point spread just because I thought Purdue was much improved. They've proved it the first 2 games. They are very much improved. Purdue destroyed Ohio, which is a good MAC team. Like I said, last few years, Purdue not only didn't destroy MAC teams, they lost to plenty of them. So they destroy Ohio, they hang in there with Louisville, and then they go on the road against an SEC opponent and destroy Missouri. SEC is garbage, by the way. Let me go back to the Tennessee-Florida game for a second, just so I can get on this SEC rant. Outside of Alabama, I don't know what is going on in the SEC. I don't know who's good. There's just nothing impressive. Michigan dominated Florida. I was convinced that Florida was a terrible team based off that game. I was convinced that Tennessee was okay. Well, Tennessee loses to Florida. Okay, well, you still got Alabama. You still got LSU. LSU destroyed BYU. LSU looked really good. Then they go to Mississippi State, who, maybe an average SEC team, and they get destroyed by Mississippi State. So does that mean Mississippi State's some great team? I don't think so. So what the hell happened to LSU? I don't know. Then you got Missouri. Yeah, they're usually on the bottom of the SEC anyway, but to lose by 28 points or 32 points at home to Purdue? What are you doing? And then Arkansas is garbage. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. Auburn, they would have been the team that I think most people would have behind Alabama with maybe LSU and Georgia. Well, they get beat, and then they come out at home and beat Mercer by 14 points. That wasn't impressive at all. Then you got Vanderbilt. They got a nice home win against Kansas State. Who knows? I mean, I don't expect them to be a good team, but so far they've been one of the most productive teams in the SEC. You got Texas A&M, who had a fabulous choke job against UCLA to open the year, and then last week they win a 10-point game against Nicholls. And then you got Kentucky, who are also 3-0, but they haven't been impressive. They beat Eastern Kentucky by 11. They beat Southern Miss by a touchdown, and then they beat South Carolina by 10. So South Carolina's no good. They started off with 2 wins. People thought maybe, but nah, I didn't think so. Then you get Ole Miss going out to California, losing another non-conference game for the SEC. So who in the hell is even good in the SEC? I don't know. I like Georgia, but I'm not convinced Notre Dame's any good. So to beat them by 1 is not some amazing feat. And even Alabama, the one team I think everybody can agree is good, they gave up almost 400 yards to Colorado State. And Colorado State had 2 turnovers. They ended up winning that game by 18. That's not It's not what you expect Alabama to do to Colorado State. But, you have to have faith in Alabama. They are probably a good team. And then, it has to be Georgia and Mississippi State right now. Those are the 3 teams in the SEC that so far, have proven to maybe be actually good. Everybody else is just so middle of the pack to straight up bad that it's unbelievable. Anyway, sorry. Back to Purdue, Missouri. Purdue's very impressive so far to start the year. I said in the first video, because I did the Purdue and Louisville game, that they would be better this year, but I didn't expect it right away. And I didn't expect that it would be, 6 wins or anything. But this Purdue team's going to a bowl game this year. I'm calling it. They have a game against Michigan, which we'll get into. But they have at least 1, 2, 3, 4... They have 5 games left on their schedule that they will most likely be a favorite in. And that would give them 7 wins. So I like Purdue a lot this year. Very impressed by them. Like I said, they ended up winning 35-3. Got the pick wrong. Got the spread right in that one. The next game from last week was Army going on the road to take on number 8 Ohio State. Ohio State trying to bounce back from that loss to Oklahoma. Ohio State was a 30-point favorite in this game. I picked Ohio State to win, and I said they would cover because they are going to be playing to get that bad taste out of their mouth. I said their weakness is their secondary, which it still is, but going against Army, that won't come into play. Army won't throw the football, and JT Barrett, even though I think he sucks, he's not going to be asked to do a lot against Army, and they should coast to a victory. They ended up winning by 31, so just covering the spread, but we got the pick right, got the spread right. It was 38-7. Final score, not a whole lot to talk about in this game. It is what it is. Ohio State beat them pretty good, as expected. Army didn't throw the ball. They ran the triple option. They had decent success with it. Short game because of Army, and that triple option offenses, they eat a lot of clock. Not a lot happened. Ohio State won. Then we had number 12 LSU going on the road to take on Mississippi State. LSU was a 6.5-point road favorite, and I picked LSU to win and cover. Obviously, both of that was wrong as Mississippi State wins 37-7. My goodness. Yeah. Like I said, LSU, they were perceived to be second best team behind Alabama in the SEC, and then they come out and do this. They get outgained 465-270. They were 3 for 13 on third down. No turnovers in the game by either team. It was just complete domination by Mississippi State. And unless you think Mississippi State is going to be an elite team this year, the SEC's got nobody outside of Bama. It is shocking. So we got that one wrong. I think I've said all I needed to say so far about the SEC in regards to last week's games. So let's jump into the next one, which is Oregon going on the road as a 13.5-point favorite against Wyoming. I thought Wyoming would cover that spread just because Oregon doesn't have a defense. Wyoming supposedly had a great quarterback, and it was a night game at home for Wyoming. I figured, the atmosphere would be great, and they would at least be able to keep pace a little bit, maybe lose by 10 points or so. No, Josh Allen sucks. I don't know. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to say I was familiar with Josh Allen coming into this season. But all I heard was how great he was before the Iowa game where he did nothing. So I gave him a chance here in this Oregon game where he absolutely craps himself. He goes 9 for 24 for 64 yards and an interception. God awful. And yeah, my bad picking Wyoming. Oregon beats them 49-13. Wyoming stayed in it for a quarter. Last 3 quarters, all Oregon. Oregon wins 49-13. Got the pick right, spread wrong. All right, up next, saving the day for the SEC non-conference. It was number 18, Kansas State, going to Vanderbilt as a 4-point favorite. I picked Kansas State to win just because I didn't know what to expect from Vanderbilt. I said last week they look pretty good, but they haven't really played anybody. So let's see what they do against Kansas State. And for that reason, being at home as well, I said Kansas State wouldn't cover the 4. I figured they'd win by a field goal or less, but they didn't win at all. They ended up losing 14-7 in a very boring game. Vanderbilt jumped out to a 7-0 lead in the first quarter. Kansas State tied it up in the second. And then nothing happened until 8:23 left in the game. Vanderbilt scores the go-ahead touchdown, and that ended up being it. Other than that, pretty even for each team. Not a lot of yards. 2 turnovers for Kansas State, 1 for Vanderbilt. So just a defensive game between these two teams, which is surprising with the Big 12 team. But yeah, I mean, so far Vanderbilt looks like a pretty good team this year. We'll see how they keep that going. So we got the pick wrong on that. Got the spread right, though. And then, we had number 3 Clemson going on the road to take on number 14 Louisville. I had Louisville winning outright. Clemson was a 2.5-point favorite, so obviously we got the pick wrong and the spread wrong. I think my reasoning for Louisville winning was sound. I said that Louisville, while they don't have a good defense, I wasn't convinced that Clemson's quarterback, who hadn't proved anything yet, even against Auburn, that was a low-scoring game, would be able to go into Louisville and keep up with Lamar Jackson on the road, at night, tough environment. I didn't think that Clemson would be able to score a lot of points. And I said Louisville would score at least 3 touchdowns, which they did. And I just thought Clemson would come up short, maybe 20 points, 17 points, 14. But they would ultimately lose, and no, it was 7-7 after a quarter, and then from then on, it was all Clemson. They ended up winning 47-21. They outgained Louisville 613 to 433. Louisville had a turnover, and Kelly Bryant goes 22 for 32, 316, and a touchdown. Lamar Jackson was pretty good. He went 21 for 42. I mean, that wasn't good, but he had 317 yards and 3 touchdowns, also threw a pick. He ran for 64 yards. So, yeah, I think now we can safely say that Clemson is still very good. I think Clemson was a big question mark coming into this year, losing Deshaun Watson and some other key players from their championship team. A lot of people had Florida State as the ACC favorite until their quarterback went down. Everybody said Auburn was a test. That was their first real test. But A, as we've seen, probably shouldn't be too convinced that Auburn's a great team. And B, Auburn's on the road. And C, the biggest question about Clemson, which is their offense, didn't really answer those against Auburn. But then they come into this one on the road against a ranked opponent at night, and they just took care of business, offense, and for the most part, defense. Giving up 3 touchdowns to Lamar Jackson. Not a bad night. So we can safely say that Clemson is a good team. They are probably still the favorite to win the ACC. And they are definitely still in contention for a national championship because Kelly Bryant answered a lot of questions in this game. So, pick wrong, spread wrong. Oh, by the way, I accidentally skipped a game. My apologies. We are going to go back a little to the lock of the week from last week. It was Washington State, number 21, as a 19-point favorite taking on Oregon State at home. I said that 19-point spread was a lock. Washington State will cover that easily, which they do. They win by 29, 52-23 against Oregon State. Oregon State is going to win 1 game this year. They already got it done against Portland State, barely. They're not going to win again. I think this one was easy to call. That's why it was my lock of the week, and it was correct. That's all we need to say about this one. Not much to talk about. Wasn't very pretty. You can see some of the statistics here on your screen. Finally, the last game from last week was Texas going on the road against number 4 USC. USC was a 17-point favorite. I loved USC in this game. Thought they would cover that easily because Texas, of course, had that terrible performance against Maryland. Bounced back against San Jose State. Who cares? USC didn't look the best against Western Michigan, but they finished strong. And then they went out and destroyed Stanford. Well, turns out maybe Stanford is not very good. In this game, I think most people probably watched it. It was a great game. Went back and forth. Texas tied it up, or Texas took the lead late. USC was able to come back and kick a field goal as time expires to send it to overtime. We go into double overtime. Texas fumbles the ball from the 2-yard line, 2 or 3 yard line. USC gets it back. They end up kicking a game-winning field goal in double overtime to win 27-24. So we got the pick right. Did not get the spread right. I'm not sure what to think of USC now, because I don't know about Texas either. This game's just confusing, because I said in the first episode of this series this year that I thought Texas was going to be a very good team this year. I did say I didn't expect them to be great right away. I didn't pick them to lose to Maryland, but I did pick them not to cover against Maryland because I thought Maryland would keep it remotely close. But I thought as the season went on, Texas would be a good team and would be in contention for the Big 12. Maybe they're head-to-head against Oklahoma deciding the conference championship. Well, never mind. They actually have a conference championship game now for some reason. Anyway, I thought they'd be pretty good this year. After the first week, that kind of got thrown out the window. But now after this game against USC, I don't know if Texas is rising to actually being a conference championship contender or if USC is more like that team we saw in week 1 as opposed to the team we saw in week 2 against a team that just lost to San Diego State. San Diego State's pretty good, but Stanford obviously not as good as projected. So I'm really not sure what to think about either of these teams at this point in the season. They're only 3 games in, but we will see as the season unfolds. So that was last week. As I said, 4-6 overall. Who would win straight up? 4-6 against the spread. 25-10 overall straight up on the season, so that's still respectable. 1-1 on upsets of the week, now that we are picking straight upsets to win outright. And 2-1 on the lock of the week for this season. So let's jump into week 4. Like I said, 8 games. Here they are real quick. And if this picture looks funny, I don't know what to tell you. I put it in last video. I edit this picture or create this picture in Paint. And it's fine. Looks fine. Both how I save it. Obviously, I'm not going to save it if it's cut off. And I put it in the video and it looks fine. But then I upload it. And by the time I see it on YouTube, I'm missing the first letter on all the teams on the left. That's what happened last week. I don't know why that happened. So if it happens again here, whatever, I apologize. You get the point. You see the teams. Anyway, let's get into this one. First game is number 23, Utah, going on the road to take on Arizona as a 3.5-point favorite. This game's on Friday night. Late start. It's 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Or 10:30 p.m. Eastern, rather. And this is our upset of the week. That's right. First game, Utah, number 23, going to Arizona. Utah is coming off of a 54-16 win against San Jose State. They beat BYU 19-13. BYU's no good. And they beat North Dakota, not North Dakota State, North Dakota 37-16 to open the year. Now they're going to Arizona. Arizona, usually, they're all right at best. They lost to Houston by 3 2 weeks ago. They beat UTEP on the road 63-16 last week. At home, night game. I'm not convinced Utah is up, in the upper tier of the Pac-12. So I actually like Arizona in this game. I think Arizona will pull it off against Utah at home, and they will get the upset over Utah. So that is the upset of the week. Lock it down. Arizona over Utah. And then we have number 16 TCU going on the road to take on number 6 Oklahoma State. This is one of 2 top 25 matchups this week. As I mentioned, a pretty lackluster week in terms of matchups. But this one should be pretty good. TCU going on the road against Oklahoma State. It's each team's first conference game in the Big 12. TCU is coming off of a win against SMU. They won 56-36. They beat Arkansas on the road by 21. And then they beat an FCS team by 63. And then you got Oklahoma State coming off of a huge win on the road against Pitt, 59-21. They also beat South Alabama on the road, 44-7. And Tulsa, 59-24. I think this is a pretty easy pick, actually. Oklahoma State's an 11.5-point favorite, by the way. I think Oklahoma State is a better team than TCU. They're also at home. So give me Oklahoma State, but give me TCU to cover that 11.5. That's a huge spread. I wouldn't be surprised to see Oklahoma State cover that. I think it's more likely that TCU loses by 10 or less. So give me TCU to cover. Oklahoma State wins it, though. And then we have the 3-0 Duke Blue Devils going on the road to take on the 1-2 North Carolina Tar Heels. Of course, it is a huge rivalry, mostly in basketball, but that carries over to the football field. North Carolina is at home, and they are a 2.5-point favorite. Duke is 3-0. They beat Baylor by 14 last week at home. Baylor is awful. I don't think they're going to win a game this year. And then they destroyed Northwestern at home as well, 41-17. That was an impressive win. And then they played a FCS team, destroyed them. Who cares? So I think a lot of people might be leaning towards Duke in this game, but North Carolina is typically the better football program, and I think they're still a better team. They are 1-2 because they played Cal, and they lost by 5 at home. Close game. North Carolina is not some great team, so losing to somebody like Cal is not unexpected. And then they lost by 12 to Louisville. Again, another team that you would expect them to lose to. And then they went on the road and beat Old Dominion by 20. So at home against Duke, I actually like North Carolina in this game to win and cover that 2.5 point spread just because that's so small. They should win by at least a field goal in this one. And then we have a very interesting game. Number 8 Michigan is going on the road to take on Purdue. We've talked about Purdue earlier. Much improved, as I mentioned. This one is interesting because Michigan, they are 3-0. They had that impressive win against Florida to open the year. Beat Cincinnati 36-14, beat Air Force last week 29-13. So they haven't been super dominant, especially offensively, but they've been getting the job done. Their defense might be the best in the country at the end of the year. But they are going on the road to take on Purdue. It's Purdue's homecoming. It's also going to be like 100 degrees with the heat index in this game. It's crazy. Michigan's a 10-point favorite, by the way, if I didn't mention it. While Purdue's much improved, the gap between Purdue and Michigan is just too large to be covered in one season, I believe. Michigan's one big problem this year is their ability to finish drives. They've moved the ball on offense against everybody they've played, but they can't finish drives. They have been to the red zone 9 times, and they only have 1 touchdown in the red zone. That's not good. But Purdue's defense, they did great against Missouri, but Louisville went up and down the field on them as well. Louisville had a couple of costly turnovers that kept the score lower than it probably should have been. Michigan's offense is not as good as Louisville, but I think Michigan, who's already moved the ball up and down on teams like Florida, I think they will have a lot of chances to score, especially field goals. Their kicker is extremely good. So they'll get some points against Purdue, and Purdue's strength is definitely their offense. Their quarterback has been phenomenal, but he has yet to face a legitimate defense, especially one as good as Michigan. They played Louisville, whose defense is all right at best, I would say. Then they played Ohio, who has a pretty good defense for the MAC. They put up a lot of points on them. And then they played Missouri, who might have one of the worst defenses in the country, at least out of Power 5 teams. So what they did against Missouri, I wouldn't put any weight into. So I think Purdue's strength does help them because it goes right up against Michigan's weakness, which is their secondary. A very young secondary that is yet to be tested by a real quarterback. Air Force only threw the ball a couple of times. Cincinnati's quarterback is terrible, and Florida's offense and quarterbacks are terrible. So the secondary of Michigan hasn't really been tested, but now they're going up against a passing team that so far has had a passer that has been very good. Although, like I said, not nearly against a defense quite like Michigan. So in the end, I just think the talent gap between these two teams is way too large. You just look at the last few recruiting classes, you look at the players on the team, what they've done last year or so far this year. I don't think there's any arguing that Michigan is 3 to 5 times better athlete to athlete. That doesn't mean Purdue can't win. I gave you some reasons why it's very possible they do win, or at least keep it close and cover the 10-point spread. But I think Michigan finally gels on offense and finishes some drives in this game. Even if it's just 2 or 3, they're going to get in the end zone after getting in the red zone a couple of times. And this defense, even against an offense that seems high potent like Purdue, should be able to hold them under 24 points at the most. I don't see Purdue scoring more than 21 or 24 if they get a field goal thrown in there with 3 touchdowns. And I think Michigan's offense will get enough done against Purdue to win this game. It could be close. Purdue could even win. But I'm going to go with Michigan to beat Purdue and cover the 10-point spread. Then we got number 3 Oklahoma going on the road to take on Baylor. This is my lock of the week. Oklahoma is a 27.5-point favorite. Oklahoma struggled a little bit early against Tulane, but they ended up winning 56-14. It was a tie game. Tulane actually had the lead at one point near the end of the first quarter. Then Oklahoma tied it right at the end of the first quarter, and then it was all Oklahoma. They ended up winning 56-14. Oklahoma's a much better team than Baylor. Like I said earlier, I don't think Baylor's winning a game. They lost to Liberty by 3 at home. That's an FCS team. They lost to UTSA, that's the University of Texas San Antonio, by 7 at home. And then they went on the road to Duke and lost by 2 touchdowns. Now they're in conference play. I'm not a big believer in the Big 12. I would say their game against Kansas is winnable, and their game at home against both Texas Tech and Iowa State are winnable technically, but I think they'll be underdogs in all of them. Their easiest opponent is Kansas, but they're also on the road, and I'm not so sure Kansas is a worse team than UTSA or Liberty. So I don't think Baylor's winning another game, and I don't see any way they don't get absolutely destroyed by Oklahoma. So give me Oklahoma, 27.5-point favorites. They are going to cover it, and that is my lock of the week. Moving on now to number 17, Mississippi State, going on the road to take on number 11, Georgia. Does Mississippi State cement that big win over LSU by beating Georgia? These are the two teams, I think, that are right under Alabama as apparently being good teams. We'll see how it plays out. Georgia at home is a 5.5-point favorite. I think Georgia's pretty good. I mentioned it earlier. They haven't really played anybody. I think App State will end up being pretty good in the Sun Belt. Their best opponent was Notre Dame on the road. They beat by 1. I'm not entirely convinced Notre Dame's a great team. Then they took care of Samford 42-14 last week. Mississippi State, they've done what they had to do against Charleston. They beat 49-0. Louisiana Tech 57-21. LSU 37-7. So this game, it's one of those 50-50 games. Georgia's at home. I'm going to go with Georgia to beat Mississippi State. Some questions about these two teams will be answered. 5.5-point spread. I'm actually going to go with Mississippi State to cover that, though, in a loss. Should be a close game, but Georgia will pull it out. And then we have number 4, Penn State, going on the road to take on Iowa. This is a night game in Kinnick Stadium. If you're a fan of Big Ten football, you know strange things happen in Kinnick Stadium. Penn State has looked great. They are 3-0, destroyed Akron 52-0, beat Pitt 33-14, although they didn't really play that great in that game. Pitt had a lot of turnovers. And then last week they destroyed Georgia State 56-0. So their defense has been great. And you look at this game against a team like Iowa, who doesn't have a lot of offense, although so far they've scored quite a bit of points compared to how much they usually do. And it seems pretty easy to pick Penn State. Penn State's a 12.5-point favorite, but just strange things happen in Kinnick Stadium, both for and against Iowa. They lost to North Dakota State last year at home, and then in a year where they weren't looking very good, I believe they only had 4 wins or so. It was later in the year. They're taking on number 2 Michigan, and they beat them in Kinnick Stadium to give Michigan their first loss of the year. I think Michigan was over a 20-point favorite in that game because Iowa was not looking good at all that year. I think it's very easy to say that Iowa is a better team this year than they were last year. At home, night, Penn State. I'm not calling for an upset. I'm going to give Penn State the benefit of the doubt and say that they pull it off at Iowa, but I don't see any way that this game is easy. So give me Iowa to cover the 12.5 points in a loss to Penn State. Finally, last game of this week is Notre Dame going on the road as a 4-point favorite to take on Michigan State. So Notre Dame destroyed Temple in their opening game, 49-16. Lost to Georgia by 1 at home, and then came back and destroyed Boston College on the road, 49-20 last week. So Notre Dame has destroyed the teams they should have destroyed. While I'm still not convinced they're a great team, they look like they are at least better from last year, which isn't hard to do. But they're taking care of business against the teams they need to take care of business to. I'm not going to kill them for losing to Georgia. Michigan State was a dumpster fire last year. Awful. And this offseason for them, awful off the field. Lost so many players, a lot of scandals, stuff like that. I don't think they're going to be a good team this year. Yeah, they're 2-0. I still don't think they're going to get to 6 wins. There's a reason that Michigan State is an underdog at home in this game, and there's a reason why The only goofball in the AP still giving them a top 25 vote was the guy doing it in preseason. They haven't proven anything yet. But this game right here will change the perception. Because if Michigan State beats Notre Dame, then they're 3-0, and I think they win at least 4 conference games. So then they're at 7 wins, they're in a bowl game, yada yada. I think this game might actually determine which team gets the 6 wins this year. I don't think the loser gets the 6 wins, because if Notre Dame loses this game, they aren't much better than last year. If Michigan State wins this game, I just still don't think they're much better from last year, but they'll be good enough to win at least 3 more games and get to 6 wins. Michigan State loses this game, I think it lends more to believe that they are still more like the team from last year, and once you get into Big Ten play, I don't see many winnable games for them. Obviously, they got at Rutgers, that's winnable. At Northwestern is winnable. At Minnesota is winnable, but the problem with all of those games is they're all on the road. They got Iowa at home, which will be tough, and then they got Indiana at home, that's a winnable game. And then, Maryland's very much improved. They got Maryland at home. Maybe they win that one. But yeah, either way, they're not going to win all of them. So it's Michigan State. They need this win badly. They're at home, night game, big rivalry game. But if you remember last year, Michigan State beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame with a huge comeback. So Notre Dame, I think, is a slightly better team. And they're coming to Michigan State for revenge from last year. And I think they get it done against Michigan State. They are a 4-point favorite. I think Notre Dame wins and covers the 4-point spread. I think they win by a touchdown at Michigan State. And I think Michigan State drops to 2-1 before entering Big Ten play. And then it will be interesting to see how it plays out for both of these teams. This is a huge game for both teams. And I think Notre Dame gets it done, especially if they like their coach. If they hate Brian Kelly, which I don't know how anybody does it. I don't know why anybody would play for him. But if they like him, which, I don't know, maybe they do, they're also playing for his job. So I think there's a lot of things that go in Notre Dame's favor. Michigan State, they've looked all right. Western Michigan has proven not to be a great team. They're nowhere near the team they were last year. Michigan State dominated them defensively, but they still only won the game by 14 points. And Bowling Green is awful. They won the game by 25 points. So Michigan State's defense has been very good against 2 very bad offenses. So this will say a lot about both teams. I just think Notre Dame pulls it out. So that is it for this week. We will see how these play out as always. And then as always, we will come back next week, review all these picks, give you a fresh batch of picks. So be sure to subscribe for the recap of all these games and the predictions for next week. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for commenting on your thoughts on my predictions and on your predictions. And we will see you all next week.